Hello and welcome to my second D&D video where we're going to talk about the basics of character creation. Now, before we get into race, there are a few basics that we need to talk about. Because one of the things that I've noticed about character creation is that there are two main things that we go over, and that is race and class, in recent D&D. Now, race and class are the main building blocks. There is also background, which does matter. And apparently 1D&D is now going to give everyone a starting feat, which is a house rule I used for a long time, where I gave everyone a starting feat. I'm quite pleased with that. That's not a bad idea. Giving everyone a starting feat is really cool. It allows you to do a lot at first level. One of the big problems with first level is that if you start at level 1, you can't really do anything at level 1. Level 1 is really, really limiting. So I would often start people at either level 3 with an additional feat, or I would start people at level 5. I liked the idea of giving everyone a bonus feat at level 1, simply because it allowed everyone to start with a few little flavour points. By having a bonus feat, it meant that if you want to play the Mounted Knight, for example, you could start with the Mounted Combatant feat, and you wouldn't be shit on a mount, that kind of thing. But I want to go through a few things that I would change with the step-by-step character creation thing. First of all, there are the main ability scores. And these are Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. Now, these are fine. I have no issue with these. There are two more, which are in the Dungeon Master's Guide. And these are Honour and Sanity. Now, I've tried using these, Honour and Sanity. They are pretty good. Honour is often used as an alternate, as the Paladin casting stat, and Sanity is used as the Warlock casting stat if you use the 8 instead of 6. I do like using the 8. It works well. If you do use them, Honour works as the save for fear effects, and will take a couple of the effects away from Wisdom, which is nice. Breaks the fact that Wisdom is such a strong save, so Honour becomes more of the fear effect thing, and Sanity becomes more of an effect for anything that would be really detrimental to mental health, like looking upon aberrant creatures, that kind of thing. Which meant the Sanity saves were rare unless you're specifically using the Madness system, which was another thing from the Dungeon Master's Guide, which works well if you're using the Sanity score. Otherwise, Sanity saves are almost never used. What this did was it meant that Charisma was no longer this broken as hell stat that had 4 casters using it, because the Paladin was now an Honour caster, and the Warlock was now a Sanity caster. I really, really like this. The problem is that if you're going to do this, you need to completely rework the monsters, because the monsters will all have abilities that hit Wisdom, Dexterity, Constitution, etc. Almost nothing will be hitting anything else. Any fear effect needs to hit Honour. You need to make a point to do that. Any aberrant creature, any mind control ability that an aberrant creature uses needs to be hitting Sanity. Any mind-bending ability needs to be hitting Sanity. If it would normally hit Wisdom, it should be hitting Sanity instead. If it hits Intelligence, it should still hit Intelligence, because they're rare. Anything that hits Charisma should remain hitting Charisma. Things like Charms, that kind of thing. Dexterity is overpowered. Dexterity just does too much. One of the things I've found to make Dexterity less powerful is if you move initiative from Dexterity to Wisdom, that makes Wisdom more useful for non-casters if they want to build that up. additionally, I would move bows from being dexterity weapons to being strength weapons. So the longbow and the short bow now require strength to hit and damage. This is way more realistic. A short bow and a longbow, it doesn't matter how accurate you are. Like, dexterity is supposed to represent like manual dexterity and things like that. Yeah, that's not what you need to draw a bow. If you've actually tried archery, you do not need manual dexterity to fire a bow. You need a fuckload of strength to pull and fire. Like, that's a lot of poundage you're pulling back. That's strength. Crossbow, firearms, they can stay on dexterity if you really want to have dexterity weapons as ranged weapons. What this also means is that now we have both dexterity and strength weapons for both melee and ranged, rather than all ranged weapons being dex-based, with the exception of the odd throwing weapon. It makes no sense that a throwing weapon is strength-based, but a bow, which is also pure strength, it's also the power of your muscles directing it, is not also strength. So, yeah, bows need to be strength-based. This will help balance things. However, now we have a problem with skills, because we've just added honour and sanity, but we have not affected the skill list. So what we need to do is we need to go through the skill list, and we need to make sure that honour and sanity have skills associated with them, because otherwise we end up with a skill list that doesn't make sense. So let's have a little look at the skill list before we move on. We have, annoyingly, the skills are not in order. We have they're in alphabetical order: acrobatics, animal handling, arcana, athletics, deception, history, insight, intimidation, investigation, medicine, nature, perception, performance, persuasion, religion, sleight of hand, stealth, and survival. Those are the skills. Those are the base skills in the game. That's without adding any additional skills. And that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 skills. Now, of those 19 skills, strength has athletics, and that is it. Just athletics. Dexterity has acrobatics, sleight of hand, and stealth. So 3 for dexterity. Constitution has nothing. Intelligence has arcana, history, investigation, nature, and religion. So that's 5. Arcana, history, investigation, nature, and religion. 5 skills there. Now, I believe wisdom and charisma also have 5. Wisdom has animal handling, insight, medicine, perception, and survival. Yep. And charisma has deception, intimidation, performance, persuasion. That is just the 4. This is why I prefer my my personal character sheets. I have my own character sheets where I separate out the skills and I put them next to each. One, I have rows where I have strength, dexterity, and I have underneath each one the skills that are associated with them, rather than having all the skills in alphabetical order and then in brackets next to them which ones are which. So there's only 4 for charisma, by the looks of it. Deception, intimidation, performance, and persuasion. I thought there was another one, but there doesn't appear to be. So there's only 4 for that. So what we've got is we've got strength with only 1, dex with 3, con with 0, intelligence and wisdom with 5, and 4 with charisma. I think that we can move a few. So I say we take a few away from wisdom and intelligence, and we can take away from intelligence. I think we take away arcana and we move that to sanity, for obvious reasons, I think. I think the magic heavy skills should go to should go to sanity. So Arcana should go to sanity. I think that insight should go to honor. It makes sense to me. That brings intelligence and wisdom down to 4 skills, alongside charisma. And honor and sanity now have 1 each. I would say that we probably need to add a couple of skills, because there are skills that don't exist that they should have. I noticed that there's no skill for understanding anything of the cosmology of the world. I described before how many planes there are and all the different plane of knowledge out there. There isn't a skill for that. So I propose we add a cosmology skill. And that should again be a sanity thing, because that's a big concept that should be the kind of thing that would be hard to take in for most people. So I would put in a cosmology skill. I think that would be a good one. Knowledge of the planes and plane of travel. That might not be very useful to some people, but it's a good skill to have. And I think that works for a sanity skill. I would put in a heraldry skill, which I would put as an honour skill, and that should be a knowledge of knightly orders, kings, queens, things like that. It's basically the politics skill of a medieval world. That I think would be useful, and that would also cover things like savoir-faire, the knowledge of how to act in high society. So that would also be useful. So now we've got 2 for sanity and 2 for honour. I think we probably need to have 3 for each to bring it on par with at least the dexterity skill. So I would add a basic dungeoneering skill. Like a lot of the issues that I have with the way that the game works is there's skill checks for silly things like dwarves get a bonus in here that makes very little sense. They get a bonus. Let me just find it. Let's just see. Stone cunning. Here we are. They get. Whenever you make an intelligence history check related to the origin of stonework, you are considered proficient in the history check and add double your proficiency bonus to the check. When do you ever make a history check about stonework? You just don't, do you? You just don't. It doesn't come up. This stone cunning thing is nonsense. It never happens. History should be about historical events, and this doesn't make sense. So I propose we have a dungeoneering skill, and that should represent knowledge of the construction of holds and keeps. It should represent like engineering skills, things like that. Perhaps we don't call it dungeoneering, perhaps we call it engineering. Something along those lines. And I would add that as another honour skill. There's no reason it necessarily needs to be honour, but dwarves are often seen as an honourable race. So I'm going to use that as a justification to add that to honour. And I'm going to say that we can add that in there. That can be the skill on things like the stone cunning thing. And rather than giving them the stone cunning thing with the weird history side skill bonus, we simply give them automatic proficiency in this skill, in this new skill. And then we need 1 more for sanity. And I'm thinking for this new one for sanity, we have nature and we have medicine, but we don't have a skill for beasts and creatures. We don't have a skill for knowledge of dangerous threats. So I think that we should have something like that. Now, animal handling covers animals. Nature would cover knowledge of plants and knowledge of the terrain and things along those lines. Nature might even cover knowledge of certain animal habitats and habits. But knowledge of how to kill a vampire, knowledge of what to expect from a beholder, how would you justify these roles? Are they arcana roles? Are they nature roles? I think they should be a new skill altogether. I think they should be some kind of beast lore. Maybe not the word beast, but some kind of lore-based, skill, and that should be another sanity skill. So the name of it we don't have to decide right now, but there should be some kind of magical threat skill, and that should be the last sanity skill. That's the kind of skill that rangers should and would have, because they should understand various different monsters. And those would be all of our skills. That means that intelligence and wisdom now have 4 skills. The new honour and sanity have 3 each. We've got our skills sorted. We've added a few new skills to the list, and we're good. Everything's good. So that's where I would place everything. One last thing I would do is, I believe that one of the things that D&D is missing is there is no defined gender in D&D. And this really breaks the immersion for me. There's also no defined size. And again, this breaks the immersion for me. I believe that if you are playing a tiny creature, you should have your attributes represent that. Again, if you're playing a female of a species compared to a male of a species, your attributes should represent that. Depending on the species, obviously. If you take humans, generally, a human being, there's something along the lines of, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's something along the lines of 95% of men are physically able to outpower 95% of women. Something ridiculous like that. Like if you were to take a random sampling of men and women, and then order them by physical strength, you would get you would get something like, if you got 20 men and 20 women, you'd end up with 18 men, 1 woman, the last 2 men, and then 19 women. That's how gender dimorphism works for human beings. We are so extreme when it comes to physical strength. Like, men can outpower women so incredibly. Like, it's one of those things that I've said before. Like, I can't stand feminism. Feminism pisses me off because it comes across as needless man hate. But if there is one thing that the various feminist groups, the ones that aren't about man hate, the ones that are just about helping women, do get right, is that the biggest threat to a woman is another human being. It's a man. Men are the biggest threat to women. The biggest threat to men is heart disease, and that's a very sobering thought. Men are huge, and men are powerful. I am over 400 pounds and 6'6". You don't get women this big. Women do not reach my size. It just doesn't happen. Now, if I get an average woman and compare them to me, I'm not particularly strong. I'm not well built. I'm not very muscular. I'm overweight. I'm not well kept. I'm not a very healthy person. But I can overpower the average woman with ease. And it's not a gloat. It's just a fact of reality. It's just physics. I'm just so fucking huge that for me to overpower the average 5'4" woman, she'll be 5'4", probably 110, maybe 120 pounds if she's particularly chubby. Like, that's not big. I mean, she wouldn't even need to be very chubby. Like 120 pounds, that's fairly standard weight actually. 120 pounds is a healthy weight. 5'4", that's a normal woman. It's a normal average woman. And I weigh 3.5 times her weight, and I've got more than a foot on her. I've got a solid 6 inches reach. Like, for me and her to be in a combat situation, it would be so hilariously one-sided. For the equivalent disadvantage to be on my side, I would have to be fighting a grizzly bear. Like, that's the difference. So I think that we need to have this. Maybe have it as an optional rule, because it is a fantasy game, and maybe you want to be able to play a powerful woman without being at an obvious disadvantage, and that does kind of suck if you want to be able to play a big powerful woman. But also, if you want to play a big powerful woman, think about big powerful women in media. Like, if you think of something like a Game of Thrones, Brienne of Tarth is a big powerful woman, and she is really, really stand out. Like, she stands out. She is bigger and stronger and more powerful than the average woman by a long way. She can stand toe to toe with the men. But when she fights with Jaime Lannister, she is about his size, and she's about on par with him strength-wise, and he can overpower her. She is about as big as women get, and she is powerful for a woman. But she's no bigger than Jaime Lannister. She's no stronger than him. She's a fair match for him. Jaime Lannister is an average man. She is nothing compared to the Mountain. The Mountain is a giant by comparison. He is huge. He is next level massive. You can play someone like Brienne of Tarth and still be a capable, really, really heroic woman in that setting. But you can't play the extreme. You can't play the Conan-style barbarian, like, bigger than everyone else, can crack, coconuts with his thighs, kind of huge. And you can't do that for good reason. It breaks immersion if you have that. And I think that it should break immersion. I think that we want more realism in order for the fantasy elements to feel like they pay off. People say, oh, it's fantasy, let everything slide. But no, I don't think that works. I think if you let just, oh, it's a fantasy, make anything slide, then you end up with no internal consistency. You end up with no stakes. You end up with no tension, and you end up with a world that doesn't feel real, and you don't care. So that's the problem. But it just doesn't apply to every race. Dwarves, for example, are quite indistinguishable depending on which version of a dwarf you're looking at. The women can often show and display beards. So the female dwarf and the male dwarf may be very, very similar. There might be almost no difference between the male and female dwarf. Same with the male and female elf. The male elf is often very feminized. They often have next to no or no facial hair. If they do have anything, it'll be a tiny wispy beard and maybe a little tiny moustache. Like, they're often shown as being very lithe and very graceful. So perhaps elves are all very feminized and dwarves are all very masculine, and there's no real gender dynamic between them, and therefore there's no gender dimorphic traits. Maybe they just don't have them. That would be interesting. It would give those races something intriguing behind them. Maybe the difference is very small. Like, perhaps for humans, the difference is as big as men get a +2 in strength, women get a -2 in strength, and we balance that with pluses and minuses and other in other stats somewhere else along the line. So there's a +4 difference in the strength attribute. That would be a sizable difference. That's noticeable. But maybe the difference between dwarves and elves is as little as men get a +1 to the strength attribute, whereas the women don't get a +1 to strength. They get a +1 to charisma, because women tend to get a more favourable reaction. They tend to be considered more beautiful. They tend to get a more favourable reaction when it comes to social interactions. They tend to be more agreeable. So perhaps that's the difference. Maybe it is just a simple +1 to strength for men, +1 to charisma for women, for dwarves and for elves. That would work because they're very similar. Whereas maybe for men, maybe for humans, the men and the women are significantly different, and it's almost like playing different races, because they are significantly different. I think that would be really interesting. I think it's something we should actually have. Additionally, then we've got something like the Goliath. The Goliath are a race that are so indistinguishable that you cannot distinguish gender just from appearance. They appear to be gender indistinct, and they are a very interesting race because of that. Because they are huge, big, beefy creatures. They're medium creatures, but they have the strength of a large creature, and they can grow to be almost 7 foot tall. They generally have little to no hair on their head. They look very masculine. They don't have any breasts. They do still have nipples. They don't have any breasts. Interestingly enough, though, they can be male or female, and you can't tell. So, that's fascinating. And in order for that race to stand out, and for male and female to matter in that regard, you need for male and female to matter in the other races. For the fact that it doesn't matter in that race, it should matter more in the others. What about something like the Aarakocra? The Aarakocra are bird people. In birds, the female is usually the larger, so it's reversed. The female Aarakocra should have the higher strength, or possibly a higher constitution, because it should be the larger bird. That, I think, will be fascinating to play. It would make for a different dynamic. It would be really interesting. The same would be true of Drow. In Drow, the men are meek, mild, and thin, and kind of spindly. I would even argue that it shouldn't be balanced. For the Drow, the female Drow should actively be more powerful than the male Drow, because they are not equivalent. It is throughout the lore, female Drow are significantly more powerful than male Drow. So I would give the female Drow straight bonuses, and male Drow not get any. That would be really interesting. It would actually feed into the female supremacist movement in the Drow, that explain why the Drow women subjugate the Drow men. That, I think, would be really intriguing to play, and it would give them more flavour. So that's something I think should be included. So that's the first step. Now I want to discuss that more broadly before I went into each race, because as I go through the race, I'm also going to describe how I would model gender for that race, because I think that's going to be interesting. And then as we do it, I will slowly build up what would be my preferred rule system. As for size is fascinating, because I think size should confer different systems as well. Like, size should make you harder to hit if you're smaller. It should make you significantly weaker, though. It should make it so that you're not as strong. It should make it so that you're not capable of taking as many hits. I find it really bizarre that halflings and gnomes don't have penalties to strength or constitution. In fact, the gnomes get bonuses to constitution. That is weird to me. Now, I realise that the problem there is that in order to make what is effectively a 4 foot tall gnome or halfling balanced, they would be, well, weak. They would be much more weak. That they wouldn't be balanced. In order to make that work, we're going to end up with a system where gnomes and halflings, things like that, are going to end up much, much better at other things. Like, they're going to have casting stats really high, and that means all the wizards are going to end up being halflings and things like that. That doesn't make sense. I can see why that's a problem. I'm not sure how we solve that without simply accepting that the smaller races simply start at a disadvantage. That said, a straight bonus to AC would be interesting. I think that could work. I do think that the halflings and gnomes, things like that, should probably get that kind of thing. Straight bonus to AC and perhaps a bonus to things like dex saves might work. But they should have a noticeable penalty to things like strength and constitution simply for their size. The fairy is a one from one of the other books. I believe it was one of the more recent ones. Might have been Fizzbands. I'd have to check though. They are much smaller. We're talking Tinkerbell here. They're only small size, which they shouldn't be. They should be tiny size. They should be the size category below small, because they're like this big. They've made them bigger in order to make them more playable, and then they've given them the ability to grow to full-size medium, which is weird. I don't like the way they've done that. If you want to play a fairy, it's because you want to play something that's tiny. And if you're going to play that, let's take that to the extreme. Let's make it unbalanced. If you're playing that, the whole reason you're playing that is because you want an extreme experience. So let's take extreme races, like monstrous races, like the pixie, the fairy, and things like the centaur, the minotaur. Let's make them, unbalanced, purposely unbalanced, and just stick a note that says these races are unbalanced. Playing these is not a balanced experience, because they shouldn't be. Perhaps we could try and balance that by maybe taking away the bonus feat for those races. Maybe playing those races is worth the bonus feat, because we could justifiably say that little pixie creature, whilst it would have a significant penalty to the likes of strength and constitution, it would justifiably have bonuses to dexterity through the roof, because it's going to be very fast. And it could reasonably have huge bonuses to spellcasting stats. Like, maybe it does have a huge sanity bonus or a huge charisma bonus. Maybe it is really, really good at magic, just because of those reasons. So yeah, I think it can work. I think that the attribute bonuses and penalties... first of all, there are no penalties in D&D anymore, which is a shame. There used to be. 3rd edition had stat bonuses and penalties. The attributes were much more balanced because of that. When you played a half-orc, you got a penalty to your intelligence score. And it was a good thing that you got that. You don't get that anymore. And that's a shame. So I'm going to be going back to old editions, and I'm going to be comparing and contrasting a little. And I'm going to be dragging some of the old mentalities kicking and screaming into my version to rebalance these and make them better. Because a lot of these are good, but they could be better. So yeah, that's where I stand, and I think this will be interesting. So for racial modifiers and things like that, we'll go through each race individually. And when I go through, we'll give a standard racial modifier, and we'll give a gender modifier as well. And we'll be going through each race in the Player's Handbook first, and then we'll go through other monstrous races through other books, and we'll discuss them all. We'll see what we think. So, the first one in the Player's Handbook is the dwarf. So that'll be the first one we talk about. And not only will I be talking about the modifiers and how I run them, but I'll also be talking about the mentality behind a dwarf, how I run them, what personality I give them, what I like to do with them in order to make them feel special, and how I like to make them distinct. Because it's fine having them be dwarves, but I don't just want a dwarf to be a stereotype. I want them to be characters. So that's my intention. Hopefully that will be entertaining, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video where we discuss dwarves. See you then. Bye.